what it means in your concept, this resilience against the modern cyber threats. So let's start with the modern cyber threats. What kind of threats you would name modern ones instead of these old-fashioned, we know how to deal with? Do you think that there are more and more coming that we will actually learn a lot, have to learn from zero of kind of threats we don't even know?
Do I have a? Oh, now now I can speak.
You can.
Yeah, thank you very much for this kind introduction. Yeah, when you directly asked me a question in the very beginning, yes, if we talk about modern threats, of course, first of all, I don't want to tear you down, since this will be a bit of both a political and a technical talk. Don't worry, I will keep it easy for you. But to understand the concepts that I want to introduce today, it is, of course, necessary to understand those modern threats a little bit. And when we talk about those modern threats, we talk about the technologies that modern malware is using when exploiting our systems. And this is what this entire presentation I'm doing here is about, recognizing the motivation and the technology our adversary has, and what we can actually do about this. This is why I was very grateful for the question that Mikko was asking to the panel about how we could organize our defense. And I was also happy about what Tenu Tamar replied to him in terms of what ideas were already on the market, like having Russian-speaking operating systems so the malware would not attack, or emulating to be in a virtualized environment, which is also a very good idea for a malware not to react. With the concept I'm introducing today, we go a little bit more strategic and we go a little bit more global. Just as a side notice, so this is a research which I primarily do under the academic umbrella of Fraunhofer. That's, you will not find a slide master here from any organizations that I have. I kept the slides quite plain. And about the Ukrainian heart, I will speak in the very end, if this is okay with you. Very good. So let's dig a little bit in. And as I said in the very beginning, we have to understand our adversary, and we have to understand the motivation of our adversary. So when we look into malware, by now, and still today, it is mostly about cybercrime. We heard this several times today already, and I'd like you to understand cybercrime is more or less nothing else but a business model. So what is the motivation of our adversary? If we see this as a core model, which we call the botnet lifecycle, it is a business model. It's nothing else about an investment. So the investment is we develop a malware. We go to the market, buy some 0 days. Maybe I have the capacities to develop them on my own, and if I have that, then I can develop a malware, which I deploy. So how do I do that? Usually using malicious emails, using drive-by downloads, so I just need to spread them somehow, then hope it's getting activated, if I have not a virtualized environment or a Russian-speaking operating system, for example. So, and why do I do this? This is to earn money by the ransom, or by selling secret information. That can be credit card numbers, that can be your company's secret business concept that you make your money with. So I'm selling your data, I'm selling it to the best paying customer, or I sell it back to you if I encrypted your data. This is how cybercrime works, basically. And this works because, more or less, we all use the same systems. We all have Windows, some may have Linux. Do we have someone using Apple? Not so many, unfortunately. Now you see, most of the malware we see is against Windows system because most of us use Windows. So it's very profitable for the attacker because he knows most of us are using Windows. So what am I doing? I'm developing my malware for a Windows system. Then I know, okay, probably millions of victims out there, and some of them will pay. So the threat out there is that we have one software. It may be an office software, it may be some industrial software, whatever, but we have thousands of possible vulnerabilities out there, or just one. But one is probably enough, because as we said, if millions of people are using the same systems, then one exploit can compromise millions of victim systems. Just some statistics from Spamhaus, just to see how many bots are out there just as of today. So you will see this is tens of millions of victims that we have. And if just a very small percentage of them pays this ransom, or we make money out of the information, then we have this life cycle. Because they pay the money, we can invest into the next fancy malware, and the entire thing starts from scratch. So what's the intention of the model that I want to present today? Is to break this vicious cycle of death that we have. For that, we have to see the problem, one exploit, millions of victims. This is what we have to break to bring down this model. So now it's getting a little bit technical. So this is how a program usually looks like. So we have a control flow, which is copied into the memory. Then at some point, we branch into this control flow, and you see every program that we execute is more or less like a sequence of code blocks that are executed. And what does an exploit do? It breaks this control flow and deviates into a malware execution. So what is modern malware doing? Modern malware is usually probably in the stack segment. What it needs to find out where it is. That's what we call the triangulation. So it more or less has a left and a right border, and with that it locates its position in the memory. And from there it can locate other code blocks that can then be used in that context to do something like a code reuse attack, which is a kind of very modern attack. So everything that the malware needs is already in your code. The malware just needs to find out where it is and execute it. So more or less using the software that you have already, using it against you for a malicious purpose that we may have. This concept is called binary exploitation. We breach the integrity of a program by a fancy exploit and then use your own software against you. Everybody nodding? Yes. You heard about that, I see. That's very good. So what happens? So we see we have the same software in every system. So once one system is infected, we have this lateral movement inside our system. One system is infecting the next system. This is continuous, and it's not only our system. It will also affect, at some point, the internet, or we transport it out with a USB stick. You'll also see some non-infected system. This may be your Apple now, for example, or simply a system that has not the software installed. But you see, this is how usually a malware spreads, and this is why we end up with millions of infected systems. That's more or less the entire story behind it. Click. Click. So the idea I want to sell you today, see me as a salesman now, is what we could do against this. How can we organize our defense? We talk about software individualization here. Core problem, we have one software, but maybe we should not have clones of this one software, but maybe we should have some more variants. That means that one exploit does not necessarily work against all those systems, and we do not see this lateral movement. So there is two examples how we can actually do this. A first example is quite easy. We could resequence those code blocks. This is here is an example just done by an operating system. So you just don't take the executable file from your hard disk, move it into your memory, and execute it, but maybe you shuffle your code blocks. So what's the effect? You do not have the same sequence of blocks anymore. You will see in a second how this results. So this is, of course, not very easy, because this needs the cooperation of the operating system vendors, and there are some technology challenges behind that. So this is doable. This is research still in progress. But of course, it is challenging for the techies. Of course, we have something like indirect branches, and we have something like object-oriented programming and even aspect-oriented programming. With that, we have dynamic structures, so it is not so easy for the compiler to reshuffle it. That means, in a way, we have to recalculate addresses, more or less. But it is doable. Research in progress. I hope I can present some results next year. Maybe it takes another year, but we are working on that. The easier solution, and maybe more viable option for us, is that this resequencing of software is done before you sell the software. That means in the moment when the software vendor produces the software, he can kind of create different variants of software. Semantics is the same. The functionality of the software is the same. Just the code in your memory will look totally different. With what consequence? So the concept that I'm presenting, we have one software, but now we have millions of variants. because the range of options that is possible to reshuffle and resort your code blocks in your memory is quite unlimited. Of course, there is at some point a limit mathematically, but you cannot sell as much software as you would need to exhaust the mathematics behind that. So here's the concept. Same software. Client A gets one variant. Client B gets another one. And you see it's not only about reshuffling. There is other options possible. Make it Russian, make code blocks bigger, or maybe even insert dump inside your code. You have a lot of options actually how you can vary your code. So, and now try to exploit that. Same situation, but now you see you have different code blocks, code block sequences installed on every machine. Every machine still works the same way. It is the same word, it's the same operating system. You do not see a difference when you work with those things. From the perspective of the exploit, it's a total different picture. Because here, you see the lateral movement already stops at step 1, more or less trying to spread through the network. No. In this situation, this doesn't work anymore. Concept understood? Nodding, nodding, nodding. Very good. Nice. So that's the white side. One software, one victim, which means you need really targeted attacks. Of course, it doesn't bring down the attack vector binary exploitation. That still works. But now think in terms of the business model I introduced in the very beginning. So if you need to produce one exploit for one machine to hijack and to compromise, is this efficient? Is this economic? Obviously not. So what will cybercriminals do? Maybe invest into a different attack vector, but not anymore in binary exploitation. The good thing is, as we learned in the beginning, binary exploitation is one of the most modern and most spread attack vectors. That means if we take binary exploitation of the market, we take 30% of the attacks of the market. And this is quite significant. So what do we need to do? If a customer obtains a license, then we build the software according to the customer's license. So we build his very own individual software version and deliver the product. You can link this to the license. So the license could actually be the source, mathematically, the algorithm that describes the sequence of the code blocks. So if your very individual version, like you have your very individual car, it's like the serial number burned into your software. You don't need a dongle. You don't need cryptographic means, which could anyway be broken. You just arrange a very specific and individual software version for each of your customer. It has some side effect as well. So if there is some kind of distributed security copy popping up somewhere, you can definitely say whose security copy it is just by seeing the code structure. So the entire illegal software copying market is squeezed with this as well. There's more side effects, but I only have 16 minutes left, so I have to hurry a little bit, unfortunately. It also comes everything what has advantages, has, of course, some disadvantages. So current software distribution is quite easy. You buy a bunch of licenses, and then in your company, and then you just spread it to your machines, like with a Vesus server or something. Now that's the easy part. That's quite efficient. And of course, we know shareholder value, and of course, every IT section of a company is kind of forced to be very economic. So this is very economic, doesn't cost much money. If we go to the new concept, unfortunately, it does not work that easy anymore, because now you actually need to install each and every system individually. But now take those additional expenses against the extra expenses you have if you have to pay your ransom. I think this one is more economic from a business perspective. Agreed? Still some noddings, that is good to see. Very good. Of course, if we have a white side, we will also have a dark side. Right in the middle of the time, that's very good timing. So seeing the concept that we introduced as something good for us, of course, the dark side has seen this concept as well. This is our problem. Well, whereas we see this concept as a security mechanism, the dark side has used this concept already. That is what we call the mutating malware. We've seen this in the context of looking into malware families, for example. If you look into WannaCry just this year, so this is early years numbers. Unfortunately, I don't have any newer ones. But just with WannaCry, we see more than 2,000 mutations just in 2 months. This is not 1 million mutations yet, so they have not fully automized this. They just do this like semi-automized and manual, but they already use the system. Changing code blocks, using a new other fancy ideas, which I will show you in a minute. So we see this in the real life already. Same as with Revil. Same time, March and April, we had more than 1,000 mutations. So they use it out of the perspective to await our recognition systems, our IDS, IPS, which usually work pattern-based. So if you just change the sequence of your code blocks, then you have a new pattern, and your IDS, IPS will not recognize it anymore. If you do not put it to the very fine-grain mode, but if you work very fine-grain, looking into very small pieces of malware, then your false positive rate will explode. So then your IDS, IPS is also not very reliable anymore because you're hunting 50% of false positives. Unfortunately, this is how it works. So there has been a lot of ideas. I will not dig into deep here now. So how to evade that? So if we start, if the granularity is too big or in that respect too small, so what could we be looking into? We could, for example, look into the function. This is a concept not invented by us, unfortunately, but we have seen this presented during CyCon, that we do not look into sequences of code blocks. We do not care about those sequences. We kind of look into what functions are used and the sequence of the functions that we have. And they developed a very nice AI-based classification system which could actually analyze control flows and do that. So more or less the idea is, if you have different versions, a version A and version B, as we just discussed, we have to look into the control flow and see, okay, let's assume that each of the code blocks is a function call. So that means we have to look now into the sequence of those functions calls to determine whether or not this is a malware. This is modern malware. What we talked about, the modern threats, so looking into the functions. If we do function-based analysis, I will not bother you now with the technical details because from a strategic perspective, you just need to understand the concept behind. This analysis more or less has a very small false positive rate because it's always the same how a malware basically works. Like you have a very first infection stage, then you have a loader stage where you load the rest of your malware. So it's kind of very typical things. You can evade the systems a little bit, but in principle, it always stays the same pattern. That means with this system in force, you can detect 4 out of 5 variants, which more or less is 20% of false positives. This is doable. The other option would be having 80% of false positives. Not so doable. This is, of course, an ongoing arms race that continues, but at the moment, the good thing is if we follow this idea that we promote here, we are quite good to catch up. Let's look into a new technique. We called this version C for this presentation. So if we know we look into functions, then of course we can simply change the function code. This is now not making the operating system only Russian, maybe bring also some content in it that does not look so suspicious. So you see each code block has a specific function, but of course you can, oops, sorry. Of course, you can exchange the function, like very simple in the blue box. Each function can, of course, be substituted by a function with the same semantic, but looking totally different. That means we do not have a change of control flow, so no semantic change. It will definitely be the same software, but we will definitely increase false positives. Have we seen this? Yes, we have seen this. Anybody heard about acid rain? Can I see some hands? Oh, at least some. Okay, this is where we saw that. So this was a file wiper used in the Ukraine conflict. So what did they do? They wiped the modems of some some wind turbines. There were some collateral, so the target was to bring down military communication in Ukraine. That was the primary target, so it was an attack against the modems of the Viasat. Unfortunately, the side effect was energy production in several European countries went down significantly, and some of the energy nets almost collapsed, so that were side effects. So they were using, in particular, this technique. And if you look into the results, what they did, so this is just for the techies in the room. On the left side, you see the attacked one, more or less wiped out, whereas on the right side, this is the original one. Right, let's have another version. So inserting false flag functions, this is also a nice idea. So the same concept again as making operating systems speak Russian. So now you just copy functions into your code, you do not execute them. You still do not modify the executable as such, but you just don't insert dump into the executable file, but you now insert function calls. So, and this is the problem if you do static and dynamic analysis. From a static analysis, you cannot follow the control flow. You just simply don't see it. Then you may have the suspicious functions. You may think this is a malware which keeps your defense busy, but indeed it's not. So same thing, you do not have a change of control flow, but to analyze this thing, now you really have to go into dynamic analysis. So you have to execute this, you have to follow the steps of the control flow just to see what's happening. So keeping your defenses really, really busy. Yeah, unfortunately, this is what the adversary is doing. So where have we seen that? We have seen this in Whispergate. Another viper we have seen in the Ukraine conflict. Now we are moving a little bit more towards the Ukrainian heart. So Whispergate was quite funny, because if you look here, so from a first view, what would you say? Asking for 10K looks like a ransomware. But actually, it's not a ransomware. It's just a good old file wiper, which they used in parallel to some other defacement campaigns. So we just pretend to be something, we pretend to be a ransomware, but actually we are just wiping files. So this is how this technology works. And so this was what we have to see now in this modern, in the current context of malicious upgrades. So we see those things coming in just through different vectors. So at the moment, one of the things which is actually coming back is steganography. Difficult word, sorry, that those functions are embedded into manipulated media files. We see updates simply done by just getting them from some pre-calculated social media sites. Facebook's very well known for that. And also we see, again, a pop-up of polymorphic blending techniques. So some harmless operations, but somewhere hidden inside is the real content. So, 5 minutes, I'm good. In a nutshell, this is not an old research. It is ongoing since 3 years, but we are now at the maturity stage where we can say we can bring this out, and we need to find the community. We especially need to find the industry to understand the idea and to support the context, and we need to create the awareness of the community that it is maybe not a good idea to continuously clone systems, and by that, to provide the attacker a huge attack surface. If we shrink this surface, then it's actually quite hard to, it's not hard to develop the exploit, but it's hard to keep up the financial concept behind that. That means now, if you want to have an exploit, as a state actor, for example, from one of your APTs, you have to pay that. And so you have to sell a lot of gas and oil in order to have enough money to pay all the 0 days that you want to bring to the market. Or you don't have 0 days anymore. That's your choice. So in a nutshell, what we do now, the adversary has caught up, but the good thing is we have a concept against that, a defense. Mikko, again, thank you very much for asking this question. And this is something what needs to be developed now and brought really into the world. And the next step we hope to have until summer next year is that we have this variant ready with the operating system, so that not even the industry itself needs to go the step, but maybe a Windows, a Linux, Apple operating systems could incorporate such a functionality. And with that, we will really give a tough time to the developers of the malware. Just as a little disclaimer, and I promised you to come back to the Ukrainian heart, this is, of course, the result, first of all, of a research thing, but of course, you are not standing alone, but you come from several affiliations. And with that, of course, a lot of those ideas were not only born in my mind, but we had some really good inputs from some Latvian and some Estonian colleagues, and in particular also from some Ukrainian colleagues. Unfortunately, we lost the contact to those Ukrainian colleagues, especially to a very good friend of mine. He's a Mi-8 pilot of the Ukrainian Air Force. He was very much contributing to the idea set. I haven't heard from him since 6 weeks, which is very unfortunate. So unfortunately, a lot of the guys that were contributing to this idea cannot be here today. I hope we will see them again one day. But this is how life is, and actually, this is not a conference to give a political statement, but in a way, we dedicate this research to all those brave men out there having good ideas and which unfortunately have to suffer now from the current situation. So I guess we have 3 minutes for question, and I'm also, of course, available in the coffee break if you want to know more about this research.
3 minutes plus 30 minutes coffee
break. Exactly. Very good.
No, anyway, thank you, actually, and especially for this Ukrainian heart, what you described. This very much works. So now questions or critique, please.
Yes, please.
Hello. I want to understand how this technology that you described, it is more applicable for the kind of personal usage, or what about the organizational and especially cloud, when you clone and actually use images and this kind of stuff? Yeah,
that's a very good question. Thank you. As said, the problem with images is a little bit tough. And this is one of the things, you refer also to patching now. And what we do, this is, of course, you do not have a master copy anymore which you distribute to the system, but you have to kind of provide each and every system its own installation and also its own patch. So if we go back to the patch days, you will not have a kind of patch day which you download from a centralized download stage. Maybe it is still a centralized download stage, but you will have to log in with your own license and you get your own personalized patch back. So there is an additional work step which needs to be done on the vendor side. Yes, this is the additional investment which we have to bring in, but the payback is you have your individual version, and it doesn't matter if it's a private office version or if it's an industrial control system or if it's the operating system of a fighter aircraft. That doesn't make a difference. This concept is very generic and it works, especially in a high security or military context, very good.
So approved, Alexander? Okay, might work? Yes, no, maybe? Yes, yes, approved. So good. Yes, please, Oscar.
I do have a question. This idea looks at least somewhat similar to this address space layout randomization. What's the actual difference and pros and cons?
Okay, very good question. I don't have the slide here now. No, I did not really want to go and dig into the deep technical details. ASLR is a concept which has been invented to protect your memory. However, it just changes the position of your executable. It doesn't shuffle the code blocks, it just changes the position of the entire code in the memory space. So that triangulation still works. So once I have found a left and a right cornerstone, this is why I'm doing this triangulation, I can locate the code in the memory. It doesn't matter if ASLR is used or not. So this technology, this triangulation that evades the ASLR technology. To counter that, you have to shuffle the code blocks. And this is the difference to ASLR. ASLR is still hackable in that respect. This system is not.
Hackable, what a word. Wow. Good. Any doubts?
Yes, please.
Critique, what else you accept? Everything.
Challenges.
Changes, suggestions, betterizations, whatever.
Maybe some future partners to implement the same.
Oh yeah, Yeah, why not? Tell us, there was the small player in these disclaimers, Baltic Defense College. You work there as a lecturer, or you involve students?
I'm still lecturing at the Baltic Defense College, but I was there, of course, doing my, so as I have a military background, I was doing my general staff course at the Baltic Defense College. So I'm a bit affiliated also through this with Latvia, with Lithuania, and with Estonia. So,
but since also the cyber security issues becomes more and more involved into military and vice versa, the military involves in cybersecurity, do you have a specially trained personnel there in Tartu College which might help to both or all three Baltic nations, even Germany, why not?
Yeah, they have some lecturers there that are actually teaching cyber. However, it is not so many of them, and this is exactly why I said I help out from time to time just by lecturing cyber lectures to their courses and also to the European Security College. So this is what we do to prepare the future military leaders in that respect.
Of course, yeah, they have to be well prepared. Yes, please.
Is there a plan to catalog all the different variations of the software that you develop? Since if we try to find like an infected version, we would know which one it is because they're all so different?
The answer to this is yes and no. The vendor, of course, probably should have a catalog according to the licenses that he gives out to the customers because they need to provide the patches. That's what I meant with the license is the key to your code block sequence because from the license, the algorithm will determine the sequence of code blocks in the executable file later on. That means if you compile it again, with that license code, you get the same executable. So this is more or less your catalog that you can always recreate. Was that the question?
And then what if the OS does the randomization and kind of playing around with the sequence?
Yeah, we actually would be happy if all the operating vendors would understand this idea and come up with that. At the moment, we are just negotiating with Microsoft on a kind of mid-management level. And of course, it would be nice to have Apple on board. And for Linux, it's about the community. So the Linux community has it in its hands. So this is the easiest one. But the toughest one is, of course, Microsoft, since they do not own the market, but they have like a major piece of pizza there. So this is, of course, Microsoft is the game changer here.
Good. Thank you very much. With a big round of applause.
Thank you.
And talking about slice of pizza, I don't know if there will be a slice of pizza, but slice of cake definitely is served. So we will return here in 30 minutes, but those who are online will return in 1 hour. So there will be a lecture which will be not broadcasted, the next one. So the most interesting one maybe for those who are here in the hall. So meet you in 30 minutes here.
Can I have a last one?
Absolutely.
Since Edgar's managed, only the Latvians can be hired by by the national CERT. NATO is also looking for talent. So all those sad faces I've seen here that could not now hire up with the Latvian CERT, we will also have posts out there quite soon again, so from January, if you want to look into that. As I've seen so many sad faces, so for NATO nations, this is
Thank you. Now all faces are happy, and this doesn't it doesn't exclude Latvians. They are also NATO nationals,
of course.
But anyway,
and also the invitees, if there are some in the room.
Absolutely. So everyone is welcomed and accommodated. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And please approach me if there is more questions.